气。
Five Elements Ninjas is late in Chang Cheh's career at Shaw Brothers. It was released in 1982, and in 3 years' time, in 1985, Shaw Brothers would cease film production and focus its efforts on TVB, the Hong Kong television broadcaster. It would resume film production much later on, but for the next decade plus, Shaw Brothers was out of the movie production business, and Chang Cheh went off and set up another company, Chang Ho, which he was originally based in Taiwan, but then it became a means for Chang to make films in mainland China. So that's 3 years, just 3 years after Five Elements Ninjas. So in the scheme of Chang's work at Shaw Brothers, this is very late in the day. In some ways that makes it all the more impressive that this is such a high point in his career, because he's already been making films at Shaw Brothers for 20 years. He's a highly experienced director, but he hasn't become stuck in a rut. I think that goes back to the point that he worked with a variety of different actors over the years, you know, from Jimmy Wang Yu, Ti Lung, and David Chang Da-wei, followed by Fu Sheng and Chen Kuan-tai, and then the Venoms mob, as they're known. That helped keep him fresh. He constantly reinvented his style, from wuxia to the Shaolin cycle, and then the sort of post-historical, very acrobatic style that he developed while he was working with the actors from Taiwan. So this is definitely late in the day, but it captures him, Chang Cheh, on fine and inventive form. It's one of his most energetic films in terms of the amount of fight scenes that take place. All of his films tend to be action-packed. He's never been shy about that. But he raises the bar in terms of what he presents here. It's a mixture of the grounded and the fantastic. In some respects, you could argue that a film like Five Elements Ninjas straddles the line between wuxia cinema and kung fu movies. It contains some of the elements of wuxia. We think of wuxia as being defined by things like the idea of xia, which is chivalry itself, a figure of the itinerant swordsman, stories that take place within the wulin, within the martial world, swordplay, the presentation of fantastic martial arts abilities, and existing outside of history. Then many of those elements are present in Five Elements Ninjas. The one that's perhaps least developed in this is the idea of xia, of chivalry. I think Lo Mang's character touches on that a little bit. He's a very honorable man. He resists the advances of the woman Ah Shun, or Junko in her Japanese name. And he's always concerned with protecting the weak. He comes to Ah Shun's rescue when he sees her being beaten. So he represents the idea of xia, of chivalry, much more so than his compatriot, played by Ricky Cheng. He's much more typical of Chang Cheh's heroes, in that his story arc is this nihilistic pursuit of death, which is so typical of Chang Cheh, going back to The Assassin in 1967. Once the plot, the revenge plot is set in motion, Ricky Cheng's character's arc is all bent towards the inevitable moment when he dies. But he does that in a moment of contentment, of satisfaction. He's accomplished his goal. He's attained his revenge. He's killed the head of the ninjas from Japan, and he dies happily, as it were. I can't think of anything that defines Chang Cheh's output more than that, and it's certainly present in his kung fu films. Many of the Shaolin films, like Heroes 2 and Men from the Monastery, feature heroes dying in battle. But they don't do it with a sense of regret. They do it with a sense of accomplishment, because they always die once their enemies are dead. In Chang Cheh's case, what we often see is the danse macabre, the mortally wounded hero fighting to the bitter end, always choosing to participate in his own death. They never run from battle. They never seek to lick their wounds and live to fight another day. And we see a variation of that here, again with the character played by Ricky Cheng, because he sacrifices himself to kill the main villain at the end of the story. So that's a version of the danse macabre. He doesn't perform Chang Cheh's classic motif of the disembowelment, in which a hero is stabbed in the gut and binds up their stomach to prevent their intestines falling out. Although we do get a moment in Five Elements Ninjas that's a variant on that, when one of the fighters is stabbed in the gut and then trips over his own intestines in the midst of battle. So that's a particularly outlandish variation on Chang's signature motif there. Most Westerners would have probably been introduced to the idea of the ninja by You Only Live Twice, both the 1967 film starring Sean Connery and the novel by Ian Fleming that it's based on. Both of those feature James Bond traveling to Japan and being introduced to the arts of the ninja, as it's described. I read the novel a very long time ago, so my memory of it is a little indistinct. But my overwhelming recollection is that in the novel he spends less time studying the arts of ninjutsu simply because he doesn't have time in order to master the arts before he has to complete his mission, whereas the film devotes a greater amount of time to showing Connery's Bond learning martial arts and learning how to become a ninja. The popular conception of the ninja in Japan really begins a few years before that. There was a series of films called Shinobi no Mono that was based in turn on a series of novels by Tomoyoshi Murayama, and they were about the historical figure of Ishikawa Goemon, but the novels imagine Goemon as a ninja. And in the films, Goemon is played by Raizo Ichikawa, the actor who'd been in the Chanbara series Sleepy Eyes of Death. There were 8 of those films in the original movie series. There was also a television series that was produced by Toho, and then there was a 9th film that came out in 1970, which was after Raizo Ichikawa had died, so he was replaced by another actor, Ryuichi Shimagawa, as Goemon. But all of those films and the television series and the novels really helped establish this figure of the ninja as a sort of master martial artist and spy in the popular imagination. Prior to that, many presentations of ninja in fiction in Japan sort of imagined them more as like wizards who could literally like transform themselves into animals and do magical spells. But that series, Shinobi no Mono, established them in a more quote-unquote realistic fashion. Much of this is indebted to Masaaki Hatsumi, who was the self-proclaimed Grandmaster of Ninjutsu in Japan. He served apparently as an advisor on You Only Live Twice. Now, Hatsumi is an interesting and sometimes controversial figure because he claims that he received from his master this collection of teachings, the 3 schools of ninjutsu and the 6 schools of samurai jiu-jitsu. And then he declares himself the grandmaster of this new thing, ninjutsu. So the historical basis for ninjutsu is vague, at least. There are no verified historical incidents of a ninja committing an assassination. No doubt there were spies. You know, when you had Japan in centuries of civil war and strife, there's little doubt that the warlords would spy on one another. But this figure of the ninja as master martial artist and spy beyond compare may not be based on anything factual. It's probably more rooted in the fictional tradition that begins with things like Shinobi no Mono. So when we get to Five Elements Ninjas, that's really drawing on, you know, this Japanese tradition. And at the beginning of the film, you know, there's this voiceover saying that the techniques displayed in Five Elements Ninjas are based on these old scrolls. So that takes us back to Masaaki Hatsumi and his claims to possess the scrolls with the secrets of ninjutsu. And you'll notice during the fight scenes when the ninjas deploy a new technique, it's introduced with an on-screen title telling you what it is. You know, these are the climbing claws that they use for cutting people, or the spikes they put on their feet. You know, everything is introduced, a special rope technique that they use for climbing down. all of this stuff. It's all introduced with on-screen titles, which is kind of an attempt to assert the authenticity of the techniques that we're seeing on screen. But I think authenticity is impossible to verify in this case, because there are no verifiable, accurate historical records that you can look at and say that's what a ninja did and that's how they did it. But they creep into the popular imagination, you know, in Japan beginning with Shinobi no Mono, in the West beginning with You Only Live Twice. But the heyday really is the 1980s. You get films like Enter the Ninja, and then its various sequels starring Sho Kosugi. You get the American Ninja movie series, which was long-running, starring Michael Dudikoff. In Hong Kong, the same year as Five Elements Ninjas, you have Ninja in the Dragon's Den by Corey Yuen. Although prior to that, one of the great instances of ninja appearing in a Hong Kong film is Lau Ga-leung's Heroes of the East, which was originally released in the West under the title Shaolin Challenges Ninja. But that shows ninjutsu, or a version of ninjutsu, with the ninja master played by Yasuaki Kurata. So it had been established, at least as an image on screen in Hong Kong cinema, prior to Five Elements Ninjas. But then for some reason, ninjutsu just became flavor of the decade in the 1980s. And they were just everywhere. Kosugi had a television show in the States called The Master, playing a ninja. And they would just pop up. There was an episode of The A-Team that had ninja in it, you know, and then we get Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which became a huge craze. And suddenly ninja were everywhere. I think the shine came off the art, perhaps, in the 1990s with the arrival of the UFC, because a ninja entered one of the early UFC events and got obliterated by Patrick Smith, a very tough kickboxer. And I think that took some of the shine off the art. Sorry, ninjas.